Begin our class, continuing Rule 14. It's talking about different things the disciples need to do in order to manifest the magical power of the soul. And he talked about a scripture here that's a very unusual scripture that he's quoted a number of times in his various books. And it says from John the Baptist until now, Jesus said, the kingdom of heaven suffereth violence, and the violent taketh it by force. It's an odd scripture, and the commentators don't know really what to make of it for sure. They figured, well, the people that preach the kingdom of heaven suffered violence, and the violent people take them and do stuff to them. They figured that's what it meant, but it says that the violent taketh it by force. And DK puts an entirely different twist on this than regular Bible scholars. He says the kingdom of heaven must be taken aggressively. And the symbol of that being taken aggressively happened at the very death of Jesus. Does anyone remember a very powerful action taken by spiritual forces right at the death of Jesus? Can anyone tell me what that was?
Was that when the veil of the temple was rent from top to bottom?
Right, exactly. And when you think of it, that was quite a violent thing to do. In other words, it was a very aggressive, forceful thing by the powers of heaven. Right at the death of Jesus, the temple, the veil of the temple was rent from top to bottom. And what did that symbolize? Why did the powers of heaven rent that veil? What did the veil hide? What was behind the veil?
The Holy of Holies.
Right, the Holy of Holies was there. So the veil was rent. And then suddenly, what was it? Open to everybody?
Yeah, everything was exposed to the masses.
Right, everything was exposed to the masses. Just not the high priest now could go behind the veil, but now everybody could see what was behind the veil and had access. That was what it was symbolic of. And to make that happen required a very forceful action of ripping the veil by force and tearing it apart. And who do you suppose did that? What do you think, Adam? What individual do you think went and ripped that veil in half?
Would it have been the Christ?
Exactly. Can you imagine? Put yourself in the Christ position on the cross. Okay, he leaves his body, and what's the first thing he's going to do? He spent a lot of time in the temple, didn't he?
It's going to expose the blasphemy that's going on there.
Right. So the first thought in his mind, now it is finished. I'm going to open to show people that there is no veil between you and God. The veil is rent. And so he personally, I believe, went and ripped that veil himself and opened it up symbolically as a message to mankind. Hey, it's just not me that has access to God. We all have access to God. What I can do, you can do. What I am, you can become. That was the great message. And it was a symbol of taking the kingdom of heaven by force. And DK goes on to explain further meaning of this is that, in other words, you just can't be a pacifist and lay down and let people run over you if you want to enter the kingdom of heaven. He says it takes a very powerful exercise of the will. You just can't go into a negative meditative state and say, come into me, Lord. You know, you have to if once the veil is open, if you just lie down and don't look, you will not see the entrance. You have to then go beyond the veil and make an effort. Once Christ has ripped the veil open for us, the veil, the path is there. We have to take the path, and to take the path requires a strong exercise of will. And violence is probably the not the best word to use. It's more like a powerful exercise of will would be more accurate representation of what DK was trying to express by quoting this scripture. So it's an interesting thing to contemplate.
Isn't that similar to Jacob wrestling with God?
That's a really good point, Adam. Yeah, it took a tremendous exercise of will for Adam to subdue the energies that was in his way between him and God. And so it is like a great wrestling match. And you notice the temptation when you ever meditate or pray or whatever is just kind of, you almost go to sleep. You have to have a tremendous exercise of will to keep that consciousness placed upon the point of spirit. And this is what he means by taking the kingdom of heaven with strong will. And so this is important. And another interesting thing about DK, where he differs from a lot of spiritual teachers, is he isn't for pacifism. The pacifists he criticizes quite often, especially during World War II. He says the pacifists presented a tremendous problem for the Allies in defeating Hitler. And he wasn't on their side at all. He says you need to take a stance and then have a strong exercise of will to make progress on the side of right. Because on the left, you're going to have the Dark Brothers having a powerful exercise of their own will. And that's one thing you did notice about Hitler, and Hitler spoke about willpower very often. Hitler had a tremendous will, and that will had to be met by powerful will on the opposing side. And there are very many powerful forces trying to keep us from taking the kingdom of heaven. And so it has to be met by a powerful will on our side. We have to exercise a powerful will to keep our mind steady in the light and not let ourselves fall asleep to that idea. Okay, any more comments on that before we move on here?
Could it be like you get to the door and it's like knock and the door will be open. It's like if you have a commitment, a burning desire to, you get to that door and you start knocking, and you also include the fact that I'm going to stay here and knock today, tomorrow, as long as it takes until you open it. That's sort of like taking heaven by storm. Because when I did that once, I got stuck on page 57 of this book one time, and I Xeroxed that page and I took it in my pickup truck, and I was committed. I was going to read that every lunch hour. I'd go out to my truck and have my peanut butter sandwich and read that page until I got it, and I got it on the very first read through.
Yeah, interesting point. It reminds me of the parable of Jesus about asking and receiving. I remember when I first read scripture when I was just a young teenager, seek and ask and you shall receive, seek and you shall find. I thought, well, this is great. So I started asking God a bunch of questions, and I just didn't get immediate answers. So I thought, well, that scripture doesn't really seem to work. And then I read another scripture later on. It was years later before this other scripture dawned on me. Is about this. A woman had some friends show up at midnight, and she wanted to entertain them and bake them some bread, and she was out, and so she needed some bread, so she went to the neighbor's house, banged on the door. And she says, and the guy says, "What the devil you want this hour?" And she says, "I want to borrow a couple loaves of bread." He says, "Go away. Don't you know it's midnight?" And she wouldn't go away. She kept banging on the door, and he kept telling her to go away, and she wouldn't go away. She just kept banging on the door. And then the scripture says, or the parable Jesus told was this, and then he said, then he went and gave her the bread, not because he liked her, and not because of any other reason than just she wouldn't give up, and it just made her go away. and then Jesus said, "Even so, ask and you shall receive." So if you ask enough to be a nuisance, so maybe these higher powers up there think, boy, this guy just isn't going to stop till we give him what he wants. And so I started applying that principle, and sometimes I found maybe 20 years after I asked and kept the thought in my mind, the answer finally came. It didn't always happen right away, but sooner or later, one by one, the answers started to come when I didn't give up. I just kept inquiring. I still got several things on the burner that I need to probably ask a little bit more consistently on, but it's amazing how that works. And so that's probably part of this principle that DK is talking about, that you're not going to take the kingdom of heaven just by sitting around being peaceful and thinking peace on earth to everybody, but you have to actually apply yourself with great power of will. Okay, interesting, very interesting principle. Any comments on that before we move on there? Well, I see Lorraine's joined with us. Good to see you. Now, we were talking about the use of hands in healing and the different ways the hands effect power. And he says one of the ways, as regards the use of the hands in turning keys, and that's where we left off about turning keys last week. He says, I will give a hint. Only those hands can turn the key in the door of initiation, who have learned the art of the centers, the significance of the hands in service, the wielding of the swords, and the 4 positions in which the hands are held in group service. I'm not sure if he spells out these 4 positions exactly, but there's different, one is hands outstretched for sure. The other is hands over the head, hands on the heart, and the hands on the various centers. There's a number of positions that can be ascertained here. But these, it's important to, the centers, he points out, is extremely important, and the hands can amplify and direct the forces in the centers. And so this is an important science to study, and it's amplified quite a bit in his book, Esoteric Healing. If you want to personally delve into this more and find out more about the centers and how the hands and how they can be used in directing force. Then he gives an interesting mantra. Radiance we are in power. We stand forever with our hands stretched out, linking the heavens and the earth. So the hands stretched out is like linking the heavens and the earth, is one of the motions of the hands. Linking the heavens and the earth, the inner world of meaning and the subtle world of glamour. We reach into the light and bring it down to meet the need. We reach into the silent place and bring from thence the gift of understanding. Thus with light we work and turn the darkness into day. It's interesting how physical symbols increase the power of the mind in manifesting those symbols. For instance, we reach into the light and bring it down to meet the need. If you say it and think about it, it has a certain amount of power. But let's say you reach your hands up, actually reach them up. Okay, everybody in the group do this. Reach your hands up and see your hands penetrating into a ball of light. Okay. Now feel your hands, both of them on fire and just glowing with light. And coming down to the third eye again, completely amplifying the power of light in the head. Your whole head is full of light. Now down to your heart. See light entering your chest area and now down to the solar plexus. And feel your whole body being filled with light. Now compare the first thing we did to the second, where we just thought about it, and then you do an exercise where you go through motions symbolizing the bringing down of light. And the symbolization is much more powerful. The churches realize this. They have different sacraments and symbolisms, baptism, the Eucharist, things like this. And they create certain effects that are more powerful than just thinking about it or talking about it.
It's a way of helping you to focus your attention.
Right. If you could do it without the outward symbolism, if you were strong enough, you could still do it. But the outward symbolism is very powerful. For instance, when a blind man went to Jesus to be healed, he spit on the ground and formed the clay out of his spit, and he anointed the guy's eyes with it and told him to go wash his eyes in the nearby pool, and he did, and he could see again. Now Jesus probably could have healed him without going through that symbolism, yet even for him the symbolism created more power, the power that he needed perhaps in order to perform that miracle, which is interesting.
Talking about hands, the words Kumara, our father, and Makara, dragon, they both have the same ancient meaning. They mean dragon, and dragon means God's hands.
Dragon means God's hands?
Yeah.
Oh, I've never heard that before.
Like a Pendragon is God's 5 hands. Like what was it, King Arthur, Pendragon connection. Pendragon means 5 hands, God's 5 hands. In other words, our senses by which God walks and talks and perceives down here. So we are his 5 hands, each of us. We're all dragons.
Okay, interesting. DK makes this interesting statement. He says, daily the Christ pours his blessing on the world. Daily he stands under a great pine tree in his garden at the sunset hour with hands uplifted in blessing over all those who true and earnestly seek to aspire. That's an interesting statement that he made, that he actually uses his hands, lifts them up, and sends spiritual energy to all those who are earnestly seeking to tread the path.
In front of a pine tree.
Yeah, under a great pine tree, he says.
Well, pine trees are known for exuding pink ray.
Oh yeah. Oh.
And that produces peace. So
Where in the world did you hear that from?
On healing with rays.
Oh,
that's why they paint jail holding cells pink. And,
really?
And pink. If you put on pink light, it makes people peaceful. And every organism takes in the full spectrum of light, and what it needs, it absorbs, and what it gives out is intensified. It's like its output is the energy that it doesn't need. And the pine trees, if you go for a walk in the pine trees, they are giving out. They don't need the pink. They've got all the pink they need. So they're giving out an excess of pink energy, and you'll feel it. Even, if you just get near a pine tree, you can feel the peace coming out.
Yeah, cedar trees are supposed to be very powerful also. Yeah.
Pine trees are also associated with Saint Germain, and when you're around pine, you get that spiritual essence feeling through the Saint Germain vibrations. Pine, pine saw, the smell of pine saw gives you a spiritual uplift. There's a lot to do with pine that has spiritual essence.
Yeah, we were in the middle of pine trees the last gathering. Pine trees all around us at McCall, Idaho.
That's more, JJ, that's more than in the middle. That was kind of scary. I was thinking if they had a fire, we'd never get out of that place.
Yeah, right. That's true. Well, these days. The mantra was, so let it be and help us to do our part. He says, there are those who have learned to say these words with intensity of feeling, raising the clasped hands above the head. And this, he talks about this, what we've been doing. And then the last word, bringing them down to the forehead, then the heart. The raising of the hands above the head and their return in touching the forehead and the heart are simply symbolic of lifting the heart and the life consciousness to divinity, and the subsequent and consequent downflow of spiritual life into the personality, the instrument through which the living soul must work out the expression of goodwill. So the student should attempt to do this as much as possible, to use this symbolism to bring the light down. If you ever feeling a little bit depressed or out of it or out of sync, just raise your hands above your head and sense yourself taking the kingdom of heaven with powerful will and joining with that oneness and bringing the light and the love down to you, and see if that makes a difference. Now, to enhance your ability to do all these things, he says a student needs to figure out what his rays are and the type of energy which he wields. Now, the type of energy that you can use to the best of your power will depend a lot on the rays which you're on. As you know, there are 7 different rays. And there will be one major ray of which your personality will be on, and another major ray which your soul will be on. And so it's important that you discern this, because, for instance, if you're on the line of 2, 4, 6, then you can best heal with loving energy. If you're on the line of 1, 3, 7, then your healing power will be manifest a lot in the power of will. So all of us will use both of them. The 1, 3, 5, 7 is linked to the male energy, which is the sending energy, and the 2, 4, 6 is linked to healing, which is the female energy. Now, actually, the 1 is fairly neutral, and it's the one from which everything springs, so to speak. So you have the so what you need to ask is about yourself in these rays is, am I drawn more toward love and feeling and intuition, or more toward willpower and purpose, and say science and mind and this type of thing? And so now all of us have all of the energies within us, but there will be certain ones that are more prominent, that are easier for us to use and access. And like I say, when people of the one line of rays gets linked with another line that are a little bit opposite polarity, they have to make an extra effort to work together. It's a lot easier working with somebody on similar rays to yourself. He speaks of the type and quality of force. The type is related to life and quality to consciousness. The disciple can gauge the quality of his forces by the circumstances and the people that are drawn to him. Okay, so look at the people that are drawn to your life, your family, your friends, people you work with, people that you get along with. What kind of people are they? That's what you want to ask. And when you look at the type of people they are, that'll give you an idea of what type of energy that you're good with working with. For instance, Stacy here has his really good friend is Jill, so they probably have a number of energies in common since they get along very well together. So Jill for Stacy would be a reflection of some of the energies that's in him. If you're in a marriage and it's successful and you're getting along pretty good, then there's certain reflections in your mate that tell you about your own energies and about your own talents and your own places where you have abilities. He says it's profoundly true that according to a man's desires, so will be the forms of life which he will, like a magnet, attract to himself. So that's a true statement, and a lot of the success coach type people like Tony Robbins and so on have really taught this idea a lot, that we attract things according to our desires. One of the best writings I've seen about using desire is in Napoleon Hill's book, Think and Grow Rich. If you want to read that chapter on desire, he really points out how important it is. He tells an interesting story about this little girl, little poor girl comes to this rich guy. This was back, I think, around the 1800s or early part of the 19th century. And her mom apparently worked for this guy, and he sent this little girl to see if he would forward her 50 cents, advance her 50 cents on her salary. And so she sends this little girl to the big boss man, and she approaches this big powerful guy, and she says, "My mama sent me to get 50 cents." And he says, "Go away, leave me alone." And she says, "My mama sent me to get 50 cents. And she just wouldn't move. And he says, "Go away." And she says again, "My mama sent me to get 50 cents. And he kept shooing her away. And then the little girl just shouts at the top of her lungs, "My mama sent me to get 50 cents. And he said, "Okay, here's your 50 cents. And he gives it to her. And that was his example of persistence and desire. I thought that was really a cute example. But the little girl, she didn't have a strong vocabulary or anything, but she wasn't going away until she got that 50 cents. He says the strength of a particular force points out the importance of persistence, whether one is on the right or left-hand path. One must acquire the will to persist if one is to succeed. So he makes that interesting statement that both the left and the right-hand path have to acquire this quality to persist. And you notice World War II is always the great example, because the qualities of persistence and a, a lot of the qualities for success were on both sides of the war. I mean, those Nazis and Hitler were extremely persistent bunch of guys, and as well as FDR and Churchill, very persistent there. So we had extremely persistent people fighting extremely persistent people. And if we hadn't have been extremely persistent, we could have never won World War II. But Hitler, with his just a small nation, created a tremendous problem for us with that tremendous persistence. And he says this quality is held by both sides. If you want to succeed, especially if we're on the right-hand path, we want to be persistent and not give up. And you know, people on the good people that are seekers, I've seen many of them give up way too early and too easy. They get a few problems in the way and they just give up for this entire lifetime. Quite often I've seen this happen again and again. And then every once in a while you meet somebody that just doesn't give up, and you have to admire that person because he or she is going to make some progress in this life. He may not become a master or anything, but he's going to get a few steps ahead just by the power of persistence alone. When you can wield either destructively or constructively, either selfishly or selflessly, or in a line with the path universal, or the plan selfish and personal, then you will work consciously and will knowingly tread the right or the left-hand path. And this interesting thing he says about the left-hand path is you have to be fairly advanced before you can take either path. The average people out there aren't on their left or right-hand path. They're just used by intelligences that are higher than themselves, and they're like pawns, so to speak. But then the disciple reaches a certain point where he can know what is good and what is evil, what is on the left and what is on the right. The average person doesn't know. It's like Isaiah said that people do not know what is good and evil. They take good for evil and evil for good because people are confused about it. They don't know what's good. I mean, look at the argument we have in the political world. People see one thing as evil and another thing, that other thing they see as good. And we have people divided over what is good and evil. Average people out there just cannot see the true difference between the left and the right, between good and evil. When the person reaches the point where he can truly see with clarity the two paths, then he can choose. And he can't choose until he reaches that point. So until a person reaches that point where he can see the divergence in the path and the true left and the true right, the true unselfishness and the true selflessness, then he can finally choose. So that's an important thing to keep in mind. Now he says the speed of the force used is dependent on three previously mentioned factors. He talks about the speed of the force, the strength he talked about earlier, and now the speed. As the person increases the strength of his power to choose and strength of his persistence and his will, then he begins to speed up, begins to make faster progress. He says speed, though, has less to do with time and more to do with correct direction. For where there is correct direction, true orientation, exact understanding of purpose, and recognition of the type of force required, then there is an instantaneous effect. That's interesting. it's possible to produce an instantaneous effect. And the key to that is correct direction. Okay, so speed has more to do with correct direction. So if you're in a car and if you're traveling on the wrong road 100 miles an hour, that's not going to get you anywhere. You have speed as far as physical speed goes, but if you're not going the right direction, you're not going to get there. If you're headed the right direction, you can actually go a slower speed and get there faster than the guy that has to backtrack. So the correct direction is important. And like in the labor of Hercules, Hercules was often wound up headed the wrong direction in his various quests. And the most interesting one was when he met a false teacher that kept him headed the wrong direction for a couple of years. And so oftentimes we're headed the wrong direction. We get wrong ideas in our minds. We get associated with the wrong people. We trust the wrong people, and they lead us in the wrong direction. So the disciple needs to be headed the right direction. And when we do head the right direction, he says we can almost like bypass time and produce instantaneous results. Now, by instantaneous results, when it's spoken in esoteric language, it's a little different than we might visualize in the physical plane. For instance, let's say you want a new car. You're not going to just have one materialize in your garage, okay? But let's say you're in the path of service and you need a new car in order to enhance your power to serve, okay? You can put all your thoughts in the right direction, and that will instantaneously manifest in the spiritual world, meaning that it will manifest in your garage at the appropriate time. Maybe not right when you're thinking about it, but it will manifest. The same thing if you need a person in your life that will help you on your path, and help you fulfill the will of higher will in some way, then if your thoughts are all headed the right direction, that person will manifest in the spirit, so to speak, instantly. But that means he's going to show up at the right time. He or she will show up at the right time in your life. So by instant, it can have several layers of meaning. And it's not impossible to have instantaneous manifestation on the physical plane of what is needed. It's fairly rare, but it does happen every now and then. Okay, he says, when the soul has registered quality and possesses the strength of the timeless one and the persistence of one who is from the beginning, the process of force expression and the relation between cause and effect is spontaneous, simultaneous, and sequential. This can scarcely be understood by those who have not yet the consciousness of the eternal now. But this spontaneous and simultaneous effect is the clue to the entire magical work in these 4 words: type, quality, strength, and speed. The story of the work of the white magician is told, but more I dare not give, as it is not permitted for me to speak more clearly. Few are yet fitted to be magicians, and few, perhaps fortunately, have as yet all the 7 centers awakened so that they can work freely on the 7 planes and with 7 types of the 7 ray energies. So that's an interesting statement he makes there, that and he's pointed this out several times in Rule 14, is that it would be dangerous to give us all he knows about it as in the wrong hands, the power to manifest anything that you can think of pretty much. In the wrong hands, like they say, absolute power corrupts absolutely. So this kind of is an absolute power. And it has to be given out very cautiously by those who understand it. He says, we live in a world of forces, and the seeker uses these creative forces in the here and now to manifest higher purpose. And so this is what the white magician has to do. He has to like tune in to the will of God and seek to be in harmony with it. If he's in harmony with it, he can manifest much more powerfully. Those on the dark path can manifest more quickly on the physical plane, but they have a limit because they're limited by their selfish desires, are not connected with the higher aspects of the soul. Whereas a white magician, once he reaches a certain point, he is much more powerful because what he manifests is in tune with higher will and will have an impact from now till the end of time, so to speak. It won't be a the selfish people have a temporary impact on everything. Everything they do is just temporary. They have satisfaction, but it's temporary. They have the fulfillment of their desires, but it's temporary. With the right-hand path, because they are manifesting higher will, which is eternal, an eternal part of an eternal plan, everything is manifest in such a way that it will endure. Okay, any comments or questions on what we talked about so far before we move on here? We just got a few more minutes. He says a white magician is seeking to accomplish two things. One, he's seeking to create a mechanism or so that the soul can use it as an instrument. This involves, as we noted, right type, quality, strength, and speed. And secondly, he's trying to build subsidiary forms of expression in the outer world through which the embodied energy flowing through the recreated sheaths can serve the world. Okay, what's something we're trying to create through white magic? What kind of form? He says we're trying to create forms of expression in the outer world through which the spiritual energy can flow.
I'm trying to create order in the mess that I've gathered.
Yeah, right. Yeah, we do that in our individual lives, but as this group here, we're getting together as a group. So
we're trying to create a molecule.
Yeah, and we, as a group, we are creating a form to manifest spiritual energy through our interplay. And so any spiritual group out there that's getting together is creating a form, if they have pure intent, that will manifest some type of spiritual energy. And each group manifests a little bit different type of purpose and energy than any other group. Okay, so next he moves on. He asks, what constitutes a disciple? He says, no man is a disciple in the master's sense of the word who is not a pioneer. He said, just recognizing certain truths and looking forward to ideals of the new age is not enough. Man has to actually, the person actually has to take steps. Now, DK uses man a lot, so his language isn't politically correct, but he means, when he says man, he means men, women, who's ever listening. So he says the true disciple has to be a pioneer. What do you think he means when he says the true disciple must be a pioneer?
You have to break out of the mold of the ordinary thinking.
Right.
He has to initiate something.
Right. He has to initiate something or working on initiating something. And he says the disciple is just really not happy with the way things are. He wants to make things better. Okay. Now, how about people in this group? Do you all kind of feel that way? Or do you feel like, are you just happy with the way the world is right now? Or do you want to make it a better place? Let's pick on somebody to answer that question. Annie, are you happy with the way the world is?
No, not really.
But it doesn't probably really disturb your peace though, right? You can still have peace of mind?
Yeah, I try. I mean, most of the time at least.
But even though you're a peaceable person and can enter into a peaceable state of consciousness, when you look out on the world, can you see how it can be a much better place than it is now?
Yeah, I often think about that. Like if just people could show a little bit more will to do goodwill to each other, that would be really nice. Yeah, stuff like that. If they knew more about karma and reincarnation, things would be different. Yeah, there are lots of things.
Yeah, I think probably one of the most frustrating things for disciples is how slow change is in the world and how difficult it is to make change. But he says it's important that the disciple not be satisfied with the way things are and attempt to improve, first of all, things in his own life and then things in wherever he has opportunity to make improvements. It says the disciple will see ways to make things better than they are now. And so Annie, you ever think if you were in charge of things, you could make things better than the people that are now in charge of things?
No, not really. I'm happy that I'm not. I mean, it's such a big responsibility.
Well, I bet if you were in charge of things, you would probably do better than what we have now. Would be my guess.
Thank you so much.
Okay, it says just recognizing just as certain things as being true and going along with it isn't enough. We got to be pioneers. We got to try to blaze new trails so that the people that are born after us will have a better life. He says the disciple sees the vision of the next steps that must be taken by humanity to fulfill the purpose of God, and then work actively to make this happen. He must do this with persistence and not give up and endure to the end. So, what do you think the next step for humanity is? Let's pick on somebody else here. Let's see. Who haven't we picked on lately? Well, we haven't picked on Ed today much. What do you think the next step for humanity is, Ed?
I think humanity needs to know that there is an effect of everything that they do. And they have to know that the majority of humanity are going around like a feather in the windstorm without any idea of responsibility. But there are those who do have responsibility, but they don't know what to do. People have to have an idea, a vision of what a better world would look like and what we can do step by step to cause that to happen. I think education right now is the important thing.
Yeah. Yeah, and a lot of the powers that be are trying to use education as a tool of programming rather than helping, especially in China. Did you read about, I read in the paper this morning how they're putting people in concentration camps, taking their kids away from them and educating them so that contrary to what their parents' belief system is, it was contrary to the Chinese system. So, you know, that's a very concerning thing. And there's people that would like to do programming like that potent here. But yeah, people need to see that you're right, Ed. We need to take responsibility, and we as people have power, a lot more power than we think we have. The reason the people don't have more power is they don't think they have the power, but they have a lot more power than they think. And we as individuals have more power than we think if we just use it and move ahead. One of the things that I see for a major step was, and this has been emphasized a lot by DK, is promoting goodwill between the peoples of the earth. He says a certain amount of goodwill has to be manifest among humanity before Christ can come again in the physical realm. And so this is a really important point too. So anything that disciples can dream up to promote greater goodwill from his family to his group, to his city, to his state, to the world, will be something that will be endorsed by the hierarchy. So this is an important point we'll end with here is one of the great qualities a disciple must have is to get a grasp of the next step that must be taken by humanity and then to work actively to make that happen. So think of what, as disciples and seekers, we must think about what we can do to help humanity take its next step. And if everybody does their part, then great things will happen. Okay, any comments or questions before we wrap it up today?
Yeah, I read someplace one time that one of the tools that a disciple must have is a walking stick, because the path goes on forever.
Yeah, it never ends. Until the universe folds up when we go through the great prolaya, and then we'll have a new universe, so then life never ends. Eternal lives on eternal worlds, as it is written. Okay, any other comments or questions?
Well, I see that the world is changing, and we have to be able to tell to our fellow man that there is good that will come out of this turmoil, and we have to tell them how it will come out and what we have to do.
And this is one of the things expressed by DK. He says, from a higher angle of vision, the higher intelligences see the spiritual will taking place and spiritual love manifesting, no matter how bad things look to us as individuals residing here. He says higher purpose is being carried out that we can't see or understand. And so as we look on the turmoil in the political world today, let's hope that is true.
As Blavatsky once said, the sense testimony is erroneous.
Yeah, certainly true. Okay, my friends, we want you to have a happy new year. I'm not going to see you guys till next year, till 2020. So don't
Happy New Year, everybody.
Don't do anything I wouldn't enjoy for New Year's.
Happy New Year, guys.
I love life.
Yeah.
To all of you.
Happy New Year.
It's a new decade.
Yeah, You're right, Ed. A brand new decade as well. We'll see you next decade then. How's that sound for a long time?
They call it the vision year, 2020 vision.
Yes.
Yeah, 2020 vision.
John and Neighbor, maybe I can call you later if I get a chance.
Okay, good to see you guys. We'll see you next Sunday at 10 in the morning, Mountain Standard Time.
Everybody. Yep.